Hey guys, Steve McKenna here. The purpose of this 5 super shoe running test was just to basically test different shoes for the triathlon community, not just myself. Last year we did a test on the Vaporfly versus the Alphafly, and I did it fresh, not off a bike. So for myself and the triathlon community, I'd like to do a test with all the best shoes, not just the Nikes, with fatigued legs. So I've gone and rode real hard for about an hour and a half, both tests, and I've put these shoes on and put them to the test against each other. All the data we've got showed that, you know, some shoes are much better for triathlon than others. We saw a bigger braking force in some, we saw more impact in others, and we saw ground contact time was a lot shorter in some. So it was really interesting to see, you know, which shoe suits me, but off a hard bike, not just which shoe is the fastest, which shoe is the best for a triathlon. So that's why we're going to run through all this data, and we're going to show you, specific to me of course, which shoe is the fastest and most efficient. Because they're so close, I'm going to have to pick what I think is going to be best for me on race day, considering different things. Like if I don't have a race for a while, yeah, I'll pick the one that has more impact but goes quicker. If I have a race coming up, I'm probably going to pick something that's got a bit more bounce, a bit more protection, so that I can back it up. Because they are so close, they really are. But what I'm getting through this partnership with Sportitude is amazing. I get the ability to test these shoes, and everyone can walk in off the street and do the same. They've got these treadmills that connect with your Run Stride pods, and you can see everything from data, ground contact time, impact, and obviously in triathlon it's a very specific kind of way to run. It's a strength run. We want the least impact for cramping and all sorts, but we also want the most speed, and using the right muscles with the right shoes is pretty important. So I actually think I'm going to keep 3 shoes in transition from now on, and based on how hard the bike ride is, I'll pick my shoe. All right, so for me, all I had to do on the day was run on the treadmill in 5 different shoes and just basically get a feel for the shoe and see which one I enjoyed the most, see which one felt the best off a bike. So I've gone on rate of perceived effort, I've gone on heart rate myself. I was staring at it the whole time, which one, you know, made my heart rate blow up, which one kept it really low. So there's a lot of little efficiency measures that are subjective, but the team at Sportitude gave us all the objective data, which they'll take you through. For me, it was too close between the Vaporfly Next Percent and the Metaspeed Edge on you know, this track here in real life. But in the lab, I've got to be honest, the Asics Metaspeed Edge, it did win for me based on feel off a hard bike. So yeah, it's confused me more that they're exactly the same in real life, but it's a good thing. I've got options. They do have different benefits, but for this weekend I'll be using the Asics because they are a little bit quicker. I feel like the heel on the back of the Asics actually hugs my heel a bit better, and I'm actually getting to use the carbon plate. Whereas I feel like in the Nike, although they've got a softer foam and less impact and less braking force, it's not really grabbing my heel. It does slip off in races with the elastic laces. So I'm going to chuck some elastic laces in the Asics this weekend at the Victor Harbour Triathlon. I'm running 18K, it's a 100K distance, and I'm going to just find out, do I pull up a little bit sorer, and can I back up 2 weeks later at Geelong 70.3 wearing the Asics? I don't know how sore I'll get because it's not as soft a foam, but I feel like the carbon plate is going to be used much better this time, and maybe I'll be going a lot quicker for the same heart rate, just purely because I finally get to use the carbon plate, which everyone talks about. I feel like for a while now I've just been using the foam and the Next Percents, and that's why potentially they don't last more than 2 races for me. I'll recycle them because they don't feel the same. So maybe it's just the foam that I'm using, and yeah, there'll be more data and more subjective data and objective data from the race this weekend. And yeah, anyway, this shoe testing thing never ends, but Sportitude is so good. They want to make sure we're all individually running in what shoe suits us best on race day. All right, so the first 3 shoes that I eliminated that didn't make it to this final was the Mizuno Rebellion Pro, it was the Alphafly from Nike, and the Saucony Endorphin Elite. And these 3 shoes, they had very solid results, and also almost comparable to the two that won. But the first to go was actually the Nike Alphafly. Off a bike, I could feel it in my quads immediately. So this is a subjective test, of course, but when we looked at the Sportitude data from the pods, what we found was they actually came second in everything. So they were one of the more solid shoes, but they didn't stand out in any field of data. So, and they were last in my subjective data. So we eliminated those because they just didn't stand out. They were pretty solid, but I know the issues that come with Alphaflys. They overload your quads. I've already used those, so they were gone. Next to go was the Mizuno Rebellion Pro. Simple reason, where I was contacting the ground was completely out of whack. It was different in both shoe. They're a very weird shoe. They did have really good results. They were about second best in ground contact time. They were fast, very fast, but I've already used them outdoors. I know I can't turn corners in them. I don't know how to run in them just yet, clearly. On the treadmill, where I was contacting the treadmill was just a mess. So injuries, the guys at Sportitude just said, this is not the shoe for you. It could be for other people, but you do not know how to run in these shoes, and it's probably going to be an injury trying to get used to them. So yeah, they were fast but gone. Saucony, they were actually really good. The only problem was for triathlon specifically, there is no way that you're going to be able to use that shoe's carbon plate with the heel that they've got. There's a bit of a flimsy material on the back. So I feel like if you've got some proper laces, you're running in a running race, they are an amazing shoe. And I actually wanted to bring them to the final until I tried them on without socks and realized, oh, in elastic laces, they're not going to be as tight, and this heel will not stay on at all. And that's why we quickly grabbed the Asics from out back, and we joined that shoe into the testing. It wasn't originally in the testing, so because the heel on that shoe sticks to you so much better than the Saucony, we subbed it out, and they had a very similar result, just slightly better than Saucony. So that overtook everything, and we came into real life here to decide whether the Vapor or that was best. All right, so you know why I've chosen the Asics, but now we're gonna flick you over to the Run DNA specialist who will take you through the RunScribe data, and that will, let you know specific to triathlon why each shoe was eliminated and why the two shoes went to the finals.
Thanks for that, Steve. My name's Josh. I'm from Sportitude. Some of you may be aware that I am the founder of Run DNA Australia, and about 4 years ago we introduced this gait analysis product into the Sportitude offering here. So like Steve just explained, it gives us a lot more insight into running shoe selection for all athletes of all levels and abilities. And in Steve's case, obviously we're dialing into his race shoe for triathlon, and more importantly looking for that long distance triathlon event being the 70.3 in Geelong coming up, and it was a perfect tester for us to get him into his race day shoe for the Victor Harbour event, which just went on the weekend gone, March 13 here in Adelaide, and he was able to push out an 18-kilometre run in that shoe at around race pace for his preparations for Geelong 70.3. So as Steve alluded to, there was a lot of shoes we put through this this testing, and in today's sort of data analysis review using RunScribe pods, we'll go into it in a lot more detail. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Okay, guys, so just to explain the process in a little bit more detail. So obviously we're looking at a race day shoe for Steve, and be it that he comes off of a pretty hard bike. And for those of you that don't know Steve, Steve is an exceptional cyclist and really does put some serious wattage through his legs on his bike legs. So what we wanted to do was test the race shoes in a race style simulation. So what Steve had done was he jumped onto his bike, went out for 90 minutes and went as hard as he possibly can in and around the streets here of Adelaide, and returned. And then we broke down our testing into two stages. So we wanted to test all the shoes that Steve wanted to look at. So we're looking along the lines of the Alphafly, the Endorphin Elite from Saucony, the Rebellion Pro, and also the Vaporfly Next Percent, which he has used previously as well. So we looked at those four shoes first at a 6-minute run on our treadmills and around 17.6 kilometres an hour, and that equates around that sort of 3:30 mark out in the road. The reason we did those four shoes and for 6 minutes is because we wanted to see how Steve's legs felt after that bike ride, with a little bit of fatigue in them, and also to measure his heart rate at the same time to get that sort of perceived effort and see where his heart rate sits in relation to each shoe tested. Now, after that 6 minute, we then eliminated a couple of shoes, And as Steve explained, for a number of reasons, some of it was based on objective data, but a lot of it was more of a line to how Steve felt in the shoe. And we'll go through the data in a second, explain what Steve felt and how it lines up with the Run Scrub data at the same time. So we eliminated a couple of shoes, and that was the Alpha and the Rebellion Pro. We wanted to go down the path of having a look at the Endorphin Elite a little bit further. However, we workshopped that in a bit more detail, and Steve, being a triathlete, he was going to find it very hard to get that locked down in the upper with an elastic lace, and it's such an important part, be it transition 2 for Steve, so he needs to get in and out of T2 as quickly as possible, and it would have been too much fiddling around, too much time wasted. So we need to look at why he liked the Endorphin Elite and see if we could find something quite similar, and that's where the Metaspeed Edge came into the conversation. So at the second test, we ran at 4 minutes, and we ran at the same pace, and that was in the Vaporfly, in the Metaspeed Edge, as well as the Endorphin Elite as well. So that's the process explained in detail. We'll go through the Run Scrub data, shoe by shoe, break down why we came to the conclusion that we did, and who knows, give you some more information about how we do things here at Sportitude Running, and give you a little bit more detail about what the Run DNA fitting process is all about. Okay, guys, jumping into the Alphafly first. Now, we kind of pre-predicted what was going to happen with this shoe. Steve has used it previously in some 70.3 events. Feedback was a bit high stack, a bit soft, and it fatigued his quads. So we wanted to still test it. We still wanted to look at some data and still get Steve's feedback and whether that was consistent with where he has been previously. So when we're looking at all of the shoes with this testing in the Run DNA rooms downstairs, we're focusing in on a few key metrics: contact time, flight ratio, impact force, braking force, pronation velocity, and pronation excursion, which is the pronation range of movement measured in degrees per second. Now, all of them are pretty consistent with each other. However, when we look at, if we just dialed in on each and every metric, there's going to be a first, second, and a third place, and there's not one shoe here that dominates all of that, all of those numbers. There's very, very marginal change between all shoes, and that's the case with most elite athletes. So just bear that in mind when we go through the data. So touching on the Alphafly first thing we dialed in was, what's the ground contact time like in this shoe? 206 milliseconds on average for his left and right. His flight ratio in this shoe was around 36%, so 36% of his gait cycle was off the ground. His shock metrics, measurable impact shock in this shoe, was 12.5 Gs on average, and his braking force was 9.6. Now, with that shoe being a higher stack and a softer shoe, we tend to see the braking force go up, and this is very consistent across nearly all levels and abilities of athletes out there, because when you've got more shoe and a softer foam and you want to get that engagement to create that response, we do hit the ground a little bit harder to get that compression through the foam, through that Zoom X foam, to find that carbon plate to help you propel you through your gait cycle. So therefore, when you're hitting the ground a little bit harder, we tend to see potentially range of movement go up with pronation numbers, which we have inside the Alphafly. It's at negative 22.4 degrees. And in terms of all shoes, that's the biggest range of movement, which is pretty interesting. And with that comes a relatively high pronation velocity, not the highest, but around at 758 degrees per second. So all of these numbers we're sort of bottling up, getting Steve's feedback about how he felt within the shoe, and seeing where it ranks in the whole scheme of things. So that gives you a bit of a synopsis of how the Alphafly performed for Steve. We knew it wasn't going to make the top 2 even before he put it on his foot, but we still wanted to get that data and to get his feedback. Okay, next shoe we tested for Steve was the Rebellion Pro. Shoe had a lot of hype since it's landed here in Australia and Northern Hemisphere, all around the world, so no wonder Steve really wanted to see how this shoe went for him. So looking at the important numbers, first we dial in on ground contact. So the average ground contact in the Rebellion was 205 milliseconds. That was down 1 from the Alpha from 2.6. Same flight ratio at 36%, so 1 millisecond is going to change a whole lot of time off the ground. So again, percentage of time being 36%, flight ratio is the same. Really interesting that we found with this shoe. I just want to jump ahead. Now, in terms of the overall engineering of Rebellion Pro to the Alphafly, is we know the stack heights are pretty similar. So 39 mils and in the heel down to 35 in the forefoot, and for that variance of 4 mil. And then same thing goes with the Rebellion Pro. 39 in the heel, 34.5. So half a millimeter variance between the two shoes. So On paper, it looks pretty similar in regard to how high you are off the ground, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that they're going to perform really differently. Surface area is completely different. Geometry of the phone is certainly very, very different, obviously. And then with regards to the surface area and where Steve lands inside this shoe, again, is going to change all the metrics that we see in front of us here, which we'll talk through right now. So again, on paper, they may present very similar, but in regards to overall performance, there's quite a change between both of them. So let's just talk to the impact shock metrics first. So a bit of a change. We have gone up half a G, so 12.5 in the Alpha to 13 Gs in the Rebellion Pro. However, dropped around half a G for braking force, so 9.6 down to 9 in the Rebellion Pro. One thing we wanted to address is we kind of knew that this shoe would perform differently in regards to pronation velocity and also pronation excursion. So if we just talk to those numbers right now with Rebellion Pro, looking at the overall pronation excursion, there's a significant change from left to right. So left-hand side for Steve, we have a range of negative 12.5 degrees of total movement in comparison to his right, which is negative 21.7. And that is a significant change, and it's more due to when you look at his shoe ride. Now, in his left-hand side, he is climbing up a little bit more towards that forefoot, and in the right-hand side, he's more dropping back towards his midfoot. So having two different entry points in the Rebellion Pro would result in the numbers on pronation excursion to be so different. And when you've got numbers that are different on pronation excursion, no surprises that there's going to be some significant change with the velocity as well. Getting up towards that forefoot, we expect the velocity to be higher, which it is, 718 degrees per second on the left versus 556 degrees on the right. So a little bit more control on that right side in overall metrics, be it shock and also mobility with his foot, range of movement and the velocity. That left side was starting to show some signs of potential risk areas for us. So such a variance in pronation numbers would be a slight orange to red flag for us to have a discussion about maybe not ruling that or putting that into your last final selections in regards to race day shoe. So overall, the Rebellion Pro was a pretty good shoe. Steve didn't mind it. However, there was too much variance in left and right across most of these metrics for us to say, let's put this one to the side. Okay, next shoe that we tested for Steve in the Run DNA rooms was the Endorphin Elite. Now, fabulous shoe. I'm going to say it personally. I think this shoe has got a lot of great features. The midsole improvements where it's come from, the Endorphin Pro 3. The upper improvements are absolutely magnificent for road running. However, when we package that all together for a triathlete, is it going to work? And what we found with Steve, it didn't quite work as we had planned. Now, what we're talking about there is the overall performance of the shoe wasn't too bad. So out of all shoes we tested, the Endorphin Elite had the lowest ground contact time, coming at 204 milliseconds. Flight ratio, pretty consistent to all of them, 36% of the time off the ground. However, what we found with this shoe, which is interesting to note, the ground contact time came down, but the impact force went up ever so slightly. So this shoe here registered the highest impact force across all shoes we see to the left through here, and that was at 14.3 Gs. However, the trade-off there is the braking force comes down ever so slightly at 9 Gs. So while it's a pretty important statistic to talk to because impact goes up, so you're hitting the ground a bit harder. However, hitting the ground harder with this geometry of foam and also that carbon plate injection, you're actually spending less time in contact with the ground. And also note that Steve, coming off of a hard bike, those quads, we want to put less stress to those quads, and braking Gs or the reduction in braking Gs is a good thing. So coming down to that equal best with regards to braking Gs at 9.0, same thing as the Rebellion Pro through here at 9.0 as well. The one thing we wanted to address obviously is the pronation excursion. Now, while the braking force is pretty similar between the Endorphin Elite and the Wave Rebellion Pro, the pronation numbers are ever so slightly different. So what we found with the Rebellion Pro was left and right was quite a lot of symmetry, and that's more due to the fact where Stephen was landing, looking at his shoe ride. When we look at the shoe ride in the Endorphin Elite, it's a little bit more symmetrical, which is great, and therefore we would expect the numbers to back up that visual. So looking at the pronation excursion, we got 17.6 degrees of total movement on the left and 21.5 or negative 21.5 on the right. So both negative numbers I should talk to. So negative 17.6, negative 21.5. The right side in the Rebellion Pro and the Endorphin Elite are almost exactly the same with that pronation excursion. The left, we've opened ourselves up a little bit on the left-hand side, but we've bridged that gap between left and right variants, which is great. And then the trade-off there being the gap with regards to pronation velocity from your landing to your mid-starts point of your gait cycle, 629 degrees per second on the left, which is down from 718 degrees on the Rebellion Pro, and then 779 degrees on the right-hand side, which is up on the Rebellion Pro, which is 566. However, the variance between left and right is closer, which we like. More continuity with your gait cycle, more pattern movement through your total stride. Again, just talking on the fact that the impact Gs have gone up. Biggest takeaway, impact Gs gone up, ground contact time's gone down, more symmetrical with your pronation numbers. So it was a very, very close call, this shoe. It honestly would have made it to the grand finale for some field testing if it wasn't for the lightweight, very free, minimalistic upper. So look, Saucony, well done for making an extremely compliant upper, very light, not a lot going on for your road athletes. It's going to be an absolute blessing for a lot of runners out there looking for that minimalistic upper and a high-performing midsole. But for Steve in that triathlon space, we need to get that good lockdown. We need to make sure that we can use some elastic laces. So in conjunction with elastic laces and this heel counter, it wasn't going to perform at the level that Steve would expect, especially at that 70.3 distance. So we didn't make it to the grand final, but what we'd learnt from this shoe and what we know and how he moved in it, we decided to then test Metaspeed Edge. So let's talk all things Metaspeed Edge. Okay, next shoe we wanted to test was the Metaspeed Edge. Now, Steve has not run in this shoe previously. He hasn't even tried it on his foot. So the reason we came to that conclusion was taking all the learnings we had through here and all shoes that we tested in that first round of 6 minute running on our 6 minutes worth of running, on our treadmill downstairs. And be it that the Endorphin Elite was such a great shoe, so close in regards to the metrics and how Steve felt in the shoe. However, he said the lack of support in this upper would be a problem for him on race day, especially obviously his triathlon, trying to get that lockdown. So, therefore, it was a very much an educated guess from our Run DNA fitters downstairs, and we came to the conclusion that the Metaspeed Edge would be one we should test for Steve. Straight off the bat, it is a lower stack height, so 33 in the heel, 25 in the forefoot for that variance of 8mm. So still keeping that offset pretty consistent with what he's had previously with the Vaporflies. So we don't want to change too much. However, we've come closer to the ground. All the shoes we have on the left-hand side through here are either 39 or 40mm, so higher off the ground. Flight Foam Turbo, as a performing foam, is a little bit denser into comparison to the others here as well. So keep that in mind. We come lower to the ground, we've got a denser foam. However, we've kept that heel to toe offset consistent to what Steve has used previously. So while we're changing some things, we're keeping some things similar. So looking at the Metaspeed Edge as a performing shoe, it was the best in ground contact time. So we got 202 milliseconds average left and right with that shoe, which is great because we're almost up around that sort of 204 up to 206 in all others. So quite a lot of change in comparison to how similar these all were. So we've really produced a great metric there with lowering his ground contact time and keeping his flight ratio up. So with that in mind, that was almost a great green flag for us. We want to proceed with this shoe. We want to see how much we can, or how much more improvement we get from other metrics. So with that, we would expect some change with regards to the impact force of this shoe. So the Metaspeed Edge averaged 13.7 Gs on impact, 9.6 Gs on braking. So impact's a little bit higher than than some of these shoes, especially the next percent. So lower, which we'll go through in 2 ticks, but we have got a slightly higher impact force with regards to the Metaspeed Edge. Braking force is pretty consistent around that 9.5 Gs. Looking at the other key numbers, we found there was a bit of variance between pronation, excursion, and velocity of movement with the Metaspeed Edge. So looking at the numbers straight away, we got pronation, excursion, we had negative 21.1 degrees of total movement. Not the worst, not the best. It's sort of very close to what we found with the Alphafly being at 22.4 and pretty close to the Endorphin Elite, which is why we brought the shoe out in the first place at 19.4 degrees of total movement. Velocity was interesting, up around 797 degrees per second on left and right average. That wasn't the worst in terms of overall numbers. The next percent on the second run, which we'll get to in 2 ticks, was up around 827 degrees per second. So interesting to note that both the shoes that kind of made it to the grand finale pronation numbers in terms of range of movement and velocity were actually in the higher end in comparison to what we found with some of the others. But ground contact time, efficiency metrics, we're best performing. And we are looking at a ratio, and those efficiency metrics are vitally important. Now, when Steve got off the treadmill with the Metaspeed Edge, straight away, eyes lit up, smile from ear to ear, he said, this felt the best. I love what this shoe does for me on my foot. Now, is it because there was quite a change from what we had experienced previously? Yeah, sure, there's some variances between all shoes, and when you put a shoe on your foot, you're going to react differently to that engineering platform underneath your body. But when we're trying something so new like that, where we've lowered the stack, we've changed the density of foam, for Steve to get off the treadmill and say that felt fantastic. Perceived effort was down in that shoe, which is really interesting to note. We haven't really talked too much of Steve's heart rate numbers with all shoes tested, but this shoe, we extracted 144 beats per minute, BPM, in regards to the Metaspeed Edge, and the next best was the Endorphin Elite, which is again 144. So again, that's great. We educated guests from our end with regards to how this shoe would perform. We would expect it to be pretty similar, both objective numbers and subjectively with how Steve felt. And obviously using the objective number, his heart rate, perceived efforts down, ground contact times down, which means his efficiency is going to go up. So from a race day shoe, it made a lot of sense that the Metaspeed Edge was a great performer. So obviously we know how that shoe performed. We want to compare it to what Steve has been using for the best part of 3 years now, the next percent. So let's jump into those numbers now. Last but not least, it is the old favourite, the next percent. Now, Steve has used this shoe now for a few years. Some of his best races have come off the back of having this shoe on his foot. He has won races in this shoe. We know there's an emotional attachment to this shoe, so we wanted to understand why Steve has performed so well in this shoe. A little bit like the Alphafly, where he kind of didn't get along with it. We wanted to look at some numbers and see and understand exactly why that might be the case. So with the next percent, it was interesting to note it wasn't the best performer across all shoes with metric, and we're looking at the total metric numbers in front of us here from RunScribe. Dialing in on the ground contact time first, it was higher. It was 208 milliseconds with regards to total ground contact time. A little bit down on the Alphafly, that was 209, and all the others, Endorphin Elite was 204, and the Metaspeed Edge was 202. So a little bit higher, 6 milliseconds higher, and the overall flight ratio was at 33%. So not quite as much time off the ground because there's an increase of time on the ground. However, main reason being is the shock metrics inside the next percent are pretty good. Impact G's come down to around 12.3 with regards to the Metaspeed Edge. They're up at 13.7. And if you comparison to your Endorphin Elite, which is a really high considered option for Stephen, bar the upper, of course, 14.3 G's. So it's pretty similar with regards to impact in the Endorphin Elite. The braking force was down nice and low, and that's a big thing for Stephen. We want to reduce that braking force and take that potential fatigue off his quads. So that came in at 9. So that was the best performing braking force in conjunction with the Rebellion Pro. So great, we've got a little bit more ground contact time, a little bit less flight ratio, but our braking Gs are coming down. And an overall pronation excursion, the next percent on the second run, we had negative 17.7 degrees in comparison to the other shoes out there, which is in and around that sort of negative 19 to negative 20 or negative 22 degrees in some of the shoes. Metaspeed Edge, negative 21.1 degrees. So we've closed that range of movement on left and right average, which is a good thing. So not as much movement going through that foot. Potentially a good thing, I should say, because there's obviously a trade-off with lightweight or racing shoes. We're happy to sacrifice a little bit extra movement, but when comparing apples for apples or apples for mandarins, whatever terminology you like to use at home, these two side by side, you have less total range of movement in the next percent than you do the Metaspeed Edge. And the other thing too on that second run is the pronation velocity has ever so slightly gone up in the next percent. So while we close the range of movement going from A to B, you would expect at the same pace, of course, at that sort of 330 per minute mark for Stephen, the velocity has jumped up to 827 degrees per second, which is at that top end of overall pronation velocity in comparison to all the other shoes. Drawing some attention to the heart rate, it's interesting to know that the Endorphin Elite and the Metaspeed Edge, they were at that 144 beats per minute. The next percent, Steve did jump up 3 beats per minute and go to 147. So you could sit there and analyse that a little bit further. I mean, that was the last run out of all of them. We'd been at our lab, at our Run DNA rooms for almost 2 hours post-bike ride. Steve may have been slightly fatigued himself, so there's all those sort of considerations we need to weigh up. But 147 beats per minute in comparison to 144, a little increase. However, the trade-off is that we got less total shock going through the body, and we had the equal lowest braking force, which is a big thing for Steve and trying to reduce that load on his quads. All in all, when we take away the RunScribe data, it was the Metaspeed Edge and it was the next percent that Steve felt the fastest in. Now, we could sit there and go, well, he feels fast in this because he's been using this shoe for 3 years. And that's understandably so. When your body is so in tune with how a shoe fits you, it hugs you, how it compresses, how it decelerates movement and then springs you through your gait cycle, you're going to feel pretty confident with this shoe. But the great thing about the Metaspeed Edge was not using this shoe previously, changing some key engineering statistics, getting a little bit closer to the ground. Steve did like how this shoe felt on his foot. So it might be one of those ones over time that he may transition into this shoe as his primary racing shoe. However, the great thing about this industry and the great thing about that sort of top-end high-performance sports level at triathlon, especially triathlon, I should say, where numbers are vitally important, the greatest thing is there's two constants of change. The athlete will change. Steve will get stronger. He will get faster. And with that, shoes will change. We know the next iteration of that shoe is coming. We don't know how that's going to perform on Steve's foot. There might be some adjustments that Nike have made with the foam, the ZoomX foam, the carbon plate positioning, the upper alterations that may impact how Steve runs. But we know right now in this moment who Steve is as an athlete, where he's at and where he's going in the next 3 months. The Metaspeed Edge is one shoe that he should certainly consider using for race day. And the great thing is he's going to be using this shoe, he has used this shoe, at Victor Harbor Triathlon. So while the filming of Steve was done pre-event, I'm sitting here post-event telling you that he won the event. He performed very, very well. He found it very hard to run slow in this shoe, and that's sometimes a bit of a challenge. So you had to constantly hold himself back from running fast. So then he's conserving all those carrots and basically all that energy, all that time that he's conserving, he can explode and push hard for that little, sort of last 3 to 5Ks and obviously chase down anyone that's in front of him. Wasn't the case at Victor Harbor. He was the main man. He was leading the whole way and did a fantastic job. So in summary, the Metaspeed Edge and the Vaporfly Next Percent from Nike are sort of the two shoes that have come out on top with regards to our testing in the Run DNA rooms downstairs, and Steve's obviously field data we grabbed out at the Edwardstown bike track. So we did have RunScribe pods. I will just throw this out there. We did have RunScribe pods on Steve's feet for that testing. However, because there's quite a camber in the velodrome there, we're getting some inconsistent data. So we decided to sort of throw that out the window and just focus on his subjective feel in both shoes and dial in on the objective data from the Run DNA rooms downstairs. So as a touch on this, part of the review is filmed after Victor Harbor Triathlon, which was only a few days ago. And what we found with Steve and how he performed in this shoe, he said to us after the event that he found it hard to run slow on that shoe. He really wanted to keep the pace up, which can be a good thing and a bad thing depending on sort of your running ability. But the fact is, actively trying to run slower, you are conserving energy. Your perceived effort's down, your heart rate's down. You're basically banking those carrots to surge when you need to surge in your race. So it's a good thing, I find. So the Metaspeed Edge for Victor Harbor was a great performance for Steve. He did win the race. He led pretty much from T2 to the finish line, which was a fantastic achievement. It is a flat course, Victor Harbor. I mean, it's not overly hilly. Running along the Esplanade there and around the streets of Victor, it's pretty flat. But this testing was all in preparation for Steve's surge at Geelong 70.3 and the events that he has coming up for the next couple of months. So conditions will always change in triathlon, which is great. So with that in mind, I would probably anticipate Steve may use the next percent for Geelong. And just in the conversations we've had briefly, is Geelong is a slightly hillier course in comparison to what he had run at Victor Harbor. So when you're taking that into consideration, you've got your descending gait and your ascending gait going up and down hill. So we need to make sure that the shoe itself can compress and perform well enough under the body. So again, I've said it a few times in this overall sort of run DNA synopsis of Steve McKenna and his racing shoe selection, that his quad fatigue is something of concern. So having a shoe that's going to lower those impact Gs, which the Next Percent does for him, may give him more confidence on race day that when he gets out of T2, he has the right shoe on his foot to really, really perform well in that half marathon, especially at Geelong. So that's a wrap, guys, from our Run DNA assessment with Steve McKenna. Now, please note that not all Run DNA assessments actually go this way for you, the running community out there. If you happen to live in Adelaide, we do have an online booking form. You can book in. It's a 45-minute consultation. We take into consideration who you are as a runner, who you've been as a runner, your current shoe selection, what your running and training goals are. Doesn't matter how big or small they are. You don't need to be Steve McKenna where you're on the podium for triathlons. You can be chasing a park run PB. You can be doing your first 10K, half K, or even a half marathon or a full marathon. Whatever your running goals are, your shoe selection is so important, and we tailor that shoe selection to match you, the runner, in conjunction with all of the other variable factors in regards to everything that comes with training for your running program. So, Run DNA is something we're very proud of. RunScribe, we've had a fantastic partnership with them for around 5 years now, and it's a gait analysis system that is like no other. RunScribe have partnered with the biggest brands in the world over the last 5+ years. Nike, Hoka, Asics have all used RunScribe accelerometers for pre-production testing or production testing with all of their prototypes. So it's been validated by the biggest brands, and all we're doing is taking that process, packaging it up into a retail form so you, the running community, can get that high level performance, high level education around your shoe selection. We're very proud of what we've been able to achieve here, and the feedback from those who have had Run DNA fits over the last few years has been overwhelmingly positive. So we thank you and for you for coming into our stores and having this assessment. And we also thank you for your time for watching this review of Steve McKenna and his racing shoe selection. Any questions, by all means, drop them in the comments section below. We will get back to you. If you've got any questions for Steve, please let us know as well in the comment section. We'll pass them to Steve. Might take us a few days to get back to you, depending on where he is around the world and where he is racing or training at that time. But guys, thank you very much for being loyal followers of our YouTube channel. We certainly appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, hit the red button, stay notified, and we'll keep pumping out shoe reviews or shoe comparisons or whatever it is that what you want, we will do it. So let us know, guys. Thank you very much. Happy running, stay safe, be kind to one another, and we'll see you out the road. Take care.